I am Kendra, 34 years old, and somehow still recovering from the trauma inflicted by my family. As a successful software developer and cybersecurity executive, I escaped their toxicity, but I still see them occasionally. Last Sunday, they hosted a fancy gala. Between the clinking champagne glasses and hushed whispers of high society, my mother leaned forward and delivered a strike meant to shatter my dignity. Pity works wonders. I just took a sip of water and smiled. That night, I logged in, deactivated all of the family's credit accounts, and emailed the lawyer about selling their assets. Before continuing this story, let me know where you started reading in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you have ever faced family members who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Atlanta meant projecting privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house with its neatly manicured lawn and heated pool was a fortress of expectations I could never meet. My childhood bedroom painted pale pink at my mother. Brenda's request, despite my preference for green, became my prison sanctuary. From elementary to high school, I maintained my upright character while participating in elite student councils and debate teams. None of it mattered. In my parents' eyes, I was merely the dark-skinned, outspoken disappointment who refused to play the docile role they demanded. The memory of the exact day my family shattered my remaining innocence is permanently burned into my psyche. It was a sweltering Tuesday in late July. I was 18 years old, standing inside the heavily air-conditioned lobby of a local Bank of America branch in downtown Atlanta. I was holding a small stack of enrollment forms for Spelman College, feeling a rare fragile sense of genuine pride. For 4 years, I had worked grueling summer jobs, lifeguarding at the community pool, tutoring younger students in advanced calculus, and doing freelance data entry until my fingers cramped. Every single dollar, a little over $30,000, had gone into a joint college savings account I shared with my father. "I am sorry, sweetie," the older bank teller, a kind-faced black woman named Mrs. Higgins, said softly. She turned her monitor slightly toward me, her brow furrowed in deep concern. "There must be some sort of mistake. The current balance is exactly $12.50. A massive withdrawal was made 3 days ago by the primary account holder, your father." The air was instantly sucked out of my lungs. I remember staring at the glowing green numbers on the screen, my mind completely unable to process the mathematical impossibility. I did not cry. I simply walked out of the bank, got into my beat-up used Honda, and drove straight back to the sprawling colonial fortress I called home. I found my parents sitting in the sunroom sipping iced tea while browsing through luxury travel brochures. Tasha, who had just finished her freshman year of college, was lounging on the expensive leather sofa, admiring a brand-new diamond-encrusted tennis bracelet on her wrist. "Where is my tuition money, Dad?" I asked. My voice was eerily quiet, lacking the explosive anger they usually expected from me. Warren slowly lowered his brochure, refusing to make direct eye contact. Brenda, however, bristled immediately, sitting up straight and adjusting her silk robe. "Lower your tone when you speak to your father, Kendra," she snapped, using the same dismissive voice she used for the hired help. "My account is empty," I repeated, stepping further into the room, my eyes locked on the diamond bracelet sparkling on my sister's wrist. $30,000. Gone. Where is it?" Tasha shifted uncomfortably, pulling her arm behind her back, but she said nothing. It was my father who finally spoke, his voice dripping with cowardly rationalization. "Tasha got herself into a bit of a financial bind, Kendra. She was trying to keep up with the networking expectations of her sorority. She maxed out a few credit cards and the interest rates were predatory. I had to step in and clear her debt to protect the family's credit score. We will pay you back eventually. You are smart. You can just take out student loans for your first year." He had stolen my blood, sweat, and tears to pay for my sister's designer handbags and European weekend getaways, and he expected me to simply absorb the debt. "You stole from me," I whispered, the crushing weight of their betrayal finally cracking my voice. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," Brenda scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "We provided a roof over your head and fed you for 18 years. Technically, that money belongs to this family. Tasha needed it to secure her social standing. You are going for a computer science degree." You don't need to be in an elite circle to sit behind a desk and stare at a screen all day. Now go to your room, I have a headache. That was the exact moment the final thread of my familial loyalty violently snapped. I did not yell, I did not throw a tantrum. I simply turned around, walked up to my pale pink bedroom, packed everything I owned into 3 large duffel bags, and left the house. I did not look back. The next 4 years at Spelman were a masterclass in human endurance. Without my savings, I instantly lost my campus housing deposit. While Tasha was posting perfectly curated Instagram photos of her spring breaks in Mykonos and Paris, I was renting a converted utility closet in a dilapidated off-campus apartment with 3 other girls. I learned how to function on 3 hours of sleep. My alarm would blare at 3:30 a.m. every morning. I would walk 2 miles in the biting winter wind to the university cafeteria, where my first job was scrubbing the sticky grease-stained floors before the breakfast rush. The heavy, suffocating smell of industrial bleach became my permanent perfume. From 8:00 a.m. to 3:00 p.m., I attended my rigorous computer science and cryptography classes, desperately fighting to keep my heavy eyelids open. At 4:00 p.m., I tutored wealthy, ungrateful high school students' kids exactly like Tasha until 8:00 p.m. But my real work began at 9:00 p.m. In the quiet, lonely hours of the night, illuminated only by the harsh blue light of a second-hand laptop with a cracked screen, I coded. I didn't just do homework. I built complex self-learning security algorithms. I was angry, and I channeled every ounce of that pure, unadulterated rage into the digital world. Code was logical. Code did not care about the color of my skin, my lack of an elite pedigree, or my mother's toxic expectations. Mathematics never lied. My breakthrough came during my junior year. The university's central database suffered a massive ransomware attack. The administration was panicking, preparing to pay a 6-figure ransom to unlock thousands of encrypted student records. I walked into the IT department still wearing my bleach-stained cafeteria uniform and asked for a terminal. It took me exactly 14 hours of non-stop blistering keyboard work to completely dismantle the hacker's encryption keys, isolate the malware, and build a reverse firewall that permanently locked them out. The university president was so astounded that he quietly awarded me a massive, unadvertised institutional grant that paid off the rest of my tuition. But more importantly, the private cybersecurity contractor the university had originally called for help witnessed my work. He didn't offer me a job. He offered me my first independent contract. That contract was the silent birth of Apex Cybersecurity. By the time I walked across the graduation stage, exhausted wearing clearance rack shoes that pinched my blistered toes, I already had 3 major corporate clients secretly relying on my encryption software. I didn't celebrate with my family. They didn't even show up to the ceremony, citing a scheduling conflict with one of Tasha's country club luncheons. Instead, I celebrated by officially incorporating my business. Over the next decade, while my father slowly hollowed out his real estate empire to fund his golden child's delusions, I built a digital fortress. Apex cybersecurity evolved rapidly, securing government contracts, hospital databases, and eventually the private financial portfolios of Atlanta's most powerful politicians. I realized early on that controlling data meant controlling wealth. That realization led me to establish Vanguard Private Equity, a firm designed to aggressively acquire the assets of the very same corrupt, mismanaged corporations my security firm investigated. I became a ghost in the Atlanta business world. The elite old money families and politicians knew my name. They feared my firm's audits and they desperately sought my financial backing, but they rarely saw my face. I kept a deliberately low profile, amassing a net worth that eclipsed my father's wildest dreams, all while he remained completely oblivious. He still genuinely believed I was a struggling freelance IT worker living paycheck to paycheck. I allowed him to believe that comfortable lie. I let my mother continue to spread vicious rumors to her church friends about her rebellious, unsuccessful daughter. I stayed in the shadows silently watching as Preston Vance infiltrated their lives, recognizing him immediately for the parasitic con artist he was. I waited. I gathered data. I built my trap with the meticulous patience of a predator. And then, The invitation to Warren's milestone 65th birthday gala arrived in my heavily encrypted digital mailbox, personally sent by the governor's office. It was time to step out of the shadows. The sharp, stinging sound of an open palm, striking my left cheek, echoed perfectly through the crystal chandelier ballroom of the city's most exclusive country club. The classical string quartet in the corner abruptly stopped playing. 200 of the city's elite senators, pastors, and real estate moguls turned their heads to stare at the commotion. I stood there in my custom emerald gown, the heat radiating across my face as I stared back into the furious eyes of my mother. "How dare you sneak in here?" My mother hissed, her diamond earrings shaking as she glared at me. "I did not sneak in, Mama. I received an invitation," I said, my voice eerily calm as I adjusted my jaw. My father, Warren, materialized beside my mother, his face flushed with a deep, embarrassed red. He grabbed my elbow, his grip bruising and desperate. "Do not lie, Kendra," he muttered through gritted teeth. "We would never invite you to a $5,000 a plate gala. You are wearing a cheap rental dress, embarrassing us in front of the state's most powerful people. Go. Leave through the kitchen before anyone else sees you." I looked at the man who had spent my entire life making me feel invisible. He was a wealthy commercial real estate developer, a pillar of the community, yet he lacked the basic courage to treat his own daughter with a shred of respect. "I am not leaving through the kitchen, Dad," I replied, pulling my arm free from his grasp. "And this dress is not a rental. She is probably here to beg for money again," a sickeningly sweet voice chimed in from behind my father. My younger sister, Tasha, strutted over, clad in a blindingly white designer gown that hugged her perfectly sculpted figure. Tasha was the golden child. She had the lighter skin my mother worshipped, followed the conventional path, and remained completely happily spoiled. She linked her arm tightly with her husband, Preston. Preston was a white man from a family that constantly bragged about their old money heritage. My parents treated him like an absolute savior, someone who had graced our African-American family with his supreme presence. Warren had made Preston the vice president of acquisitions at his real estate firm the very day after the wedding, despite Preston having zero actual experience in commercial property management. Preston looked me up and down, a patronizing smirk playing on his lips. He let out a loud, condescending sigh. "Listen, Kendra. If you are struggling to pay rent at whatever cramped, rundown apartment you are living in these days, I can write you a check right now. Just do not cause a scene at Warren's milestone birthday. We have high net worth investors here, and you are upsetting the ambiance." He reached into his tailored tuxedo jacket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and threw it at my feet. "Take an Uber back to your side of town. Let the adults handle the real business tonight." I stared down at the crumpled bill on the polished marble floor, and then I looked back up at Preston's smug face. The sheer audacity of his white privilege wrapped in my family's internalized self-hatred was almost comical. "Beg for money?" I asked, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal edge that made a few nearby guests lean in closer to eavesdrop. "Like how you begged Dad to drain my college fund to pay for Tasha's third destination wedding. Or how Dad took out a second mortgage on the ancestral home just to cover your country club initiation fee. Preston." My mother gasped loudly, her hand flying to her chest as she looked around frantically at the whispering crowd. "You shut your mouth right now. You are a college dropout who does glorified data entry. Tasha and Preston are building a legacy for this family. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my computer science degree after you stole my tuition." I shot back, taking a deliberate step forward. "I am not doing data entry, Mama. I build security infrastructure." "Security!" My mother shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She frantically waved her arms toward the back of the room. "Security, get over here. Remove this lunatic immediately." 2 heavily muscled security guards in matching black suits immediately broke through the crowd, heading straight toward me. Their faces were set in grim determination, clearly eager to please the wealthy patrons who paid their salaries. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply adjusted my posture, standing perfectly straight in my emerald gown, waiting for the inevitable collision. The surrounding guests murmured in hushed, scandalized tones, completely captivated by the sudden implosion of my supposedly perfect family. My father crossed his arms, looking down at me with absolute disdain. Tasha leaned her head dramatically on Preston's shoulder, feigning terror, while a victorious smirk danced across her lips. Just as the closest guard reached out his thick hand to grab my bare shoulder, a booming, deeply resonant voice shattered the tense atmosphere. "If either of you lays a single finger on that woman, my personal security detail will have you both on the ground and handcuffed before you can even take another breath." The entire ballroom froze as if struck by lightning. The two advancing guards stopped dead in their tracks, their hands hovering uselessly in the air. From the center VIP table, the most important man in the room slowly stood up. Governor Thomas Sterling, the highly respected political leader of the state, pushed his chair back. His own Secret Service agents immediately flanked him, their eyes scanning the room with terrifying precision. I ignored the bewildered whispers of the crowd and walked deliberately across the polished marble floor, heading directly toward our table. My mother's manicured hand dropped slowly to her side. The furious red flush on my father's face instantly drained away, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. Preston, who had been chuckling just seconds before, swallowed hard and nervously adjusted his expensive silk bow tie. Tasha looked around frantically, completely confused as to why the guest of honor was interfering with my removal. Governor Sterling did not even glance at the security guards as he stepped between them, forcing them to back away in complete submission. He walked right past my stunned mother, completely bypassed my arrogant brother-in-law, and came to a stop directly beside me. He turned his imposing figure toward my father, his dark eyes radiating an icy, unmistakable fury. "Warren," the governor said, his voice deadly quiet, but carrying enough power to reach every single person in the silent ballroom. "Did I just hear you correctly? Did you genuinely just tell this incredible woman to leave your event through the kitchen doors?" My father stammered, wiping a sudden bead of sweat from his wrinkling forehead. "Governor Sterling, I am so deeply sorry for this ridiculous disruption. Please forgive the scene. This is just my estranged daughter. She is highly unstable and deeply troubled. She does small-time event planning and constantly seeks attention. We are just trying to handle a private family matter without ruining your evening." Small-time event planning. The governor let out a sharp, booming laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The sound held absolutely zero humor. "Warren, do you have any idea who you are actually talking to? Do you even know who she is?" My family looked completely blank. My mother blinked rapidly, clearly struggling to comprehend the situation. Preston scowled, looking offended that the governor was defending someone he viewed as entirely beneath him. Tasha clutched her expensive purse, her eyes darting nervously between me and the politician. "I am waiting for an answer, Warren," the governor pressed, stepping closer to my trembling father. "You stand here parading your wealth, showing off your commercial real estate empire to the city elite. Yet you do not even recognize the most powerful person standing in this entire building." My father opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no words came out. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the very first time in over a decade. He saw the custom-tailored gown, the undeniable confidence in my posture, and the complete lack of fear in my eyes. Governor Sterling turned gracefully to face the captivated audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to the woman who truly runs this city," he announced, his voice projecting with practiced political authority. "This is Kendra. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Private Equity and Apex Cybersecurity. She does not plan small parties. She single-handedly managed and funded my entire winning gubernatorial campaign last year." A collective audible gasp rippled through the massive room. The high society pastors, the wealthy senators, and the corporate tycoons began whispering frantically to one another. "She handles the most sensitive financial portfolios for half the people sitting in this very room," the governor continued, placing a respectful hand on my shoulder. "She secures the digital infrastructure for our state government. In fact, she is the sole reason I am even attending this event tonight. She is the one who generously paid for my VIP table, not you, Warren." My mother's mouth opened and closed silently, resembling a fish pulled entirely out of water. Her entire world, built meticulously on absolute control, social perception, and maintaining a flawless public image, was rapidly disintegrating right before her eyes. The daughter she had relentlessly hidden away, the child she had constantly mocked for not being light-skinned or compliant enough, was currently being praised by the most powerful elected official in the state. Tasha's smug, victorious smile completely evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She looked down at the $100 bill Preston had so arrogantly thrown at my feet just moments earlier. It now looked like the most pathetic, foolish gesture imaginable. "You told her to leave through the kitchen," the governor said softly, turning his attention back to my humiliated parents. "You treated one of the most brilliant, formidable financial minds in the entire country like she was a common trespasser. I have never witnessed such profound ignorance." The heavy silence following the governor's reprimand was instantly shattered by a harsh, grating laugh. Tasha stepped out from behind her husband, her face twisted into an ugly, desperate sneer. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face, her diamond bracelets clinking loudly in the quiet room. "Are you all actually buying this ridiculous performance?" Tasha yelled, looking wildly around at the stunned guests. "This is Kendra. She is a massive liar. If she really is running some giant financial firm, we all know exactly how she got there. She either scammed her way into that position or she slept her way to the very top. My sister has absolutely no class, no pedigree, and certainly no real money. She is just a bitter, jealous outcast trying to ruin our father's special night because she knows she will never belong in our world." I slowly turned my attention away from the governor and locked eyes with my sister. The sheer desperation in her voice was pathetic, a completely transparent attempt to protect her fragile, unearned status. I took a deliberate step toward her, the emerald silk of my custom gown sweeping gracefully across the floor. "Pedigree?" I asked, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity. "Is that what we are calling it now? Tasha, let us talk about your elite pedigree. Let us tell all these esteemed guests exactly how your flawless image was financed." Tasha faltered, taking a slight step back, but I did not let her retreat. I raised my voice so that every politician, wealthy investor, and socialite in the grand ballroom could hear every single word. "Do you remember the long summer before I was finally supposed to leave for Spelman College?" I demanded, locking my intense gaze on my father. Warren physically shrank under my stare, his broad shoulders slumping in sudden panic. I had a full academic scholarship lined up, but I still needed my personal college savings to cover the remaining tuition and campus housing, the sacred fund I had been putting my own grueling summer job money into since I was 14 years old. But when I went to the local bank to withdraw it, the account was completely empty. I turned back to Tasha, my eyes blazing with years of fiercely suppressed anger. "You maxed out 5 different luxury credit cards trying to keep up with your incredibly wealthy sorority sisters. You owed over $80,000. Instead of making you face the harsh consequences of your own reckless vanity, Dad completely drained my HBCU college fund to bail you out secretly. He stole my future to protect your pathetic social life," I declared. Brenda let out a strangled gasp, desperately attempting to step between us. "Kendra, that is a strictly private family matter. You have absolutely no right to air our business in public. You made it public the exact second you slapped me and tried to have me thrown out like common trash." I fired back, my voice echoing off the tall marble pillars. "I want everyone here to know exactly what kind of corrupt legacy the great Warren family is actually building. Because of your disgusting theft, I instantly lost my campus housing. I had to work 3 grueling jobs just to stay enrolled. I scrubbed sticky cafeteria floors at 4 in the morning, tutored privileged kids, exactly like Tasha, until noon, and coded complex databases until midnight, just to survive another day." I pointed a steady finger directly at Tasha's highly expensive white gown. "You walked proudly across your graduation stage wearing genuine pearls that Dad bought you as a lavish reward for barely scraping by with a passing grade." I walked across my graduation stage running on 2 agonizing hours of sleep, wearing heavy clearance rack shoes, knowing I had fought tooth and nail for every single inch of my degree. I did not sleep my way to the top, Tasha. I built my massive empire with the very same bare hands you and your terrible parents tried so desperately to break. The whispers among the elite gala guests grew into a deafening roar of absolute judgment. The wealthy megachurch pastors shook their heads in utter disappointment. The powerful political donors exchanged horrified glances, completely appalled by my father's cruel actions. In the affluent circles of Atlanta, stealing from a child's hard-earned education fund to cover up frivolous debt was considered an unforgivable social sin. My mother covered her heavily made-up face with her shaking hands, finally realizing that her precious, carefully curated reputation was violently burning to the ground right in front of her. Tasha's face turned a violent, blotchy shade of purple. She looked around the massive room, desperately searching for a single sympathetic face, but found absolutely nothing, except glaring condemnation. "You are just making all of this up right now," she screamed, her voice cracking horribly under the immense pressure. "You have always been a deeply jealous, vindictive monster. Preston, do something. Make her stop lying about us immediately." Preston puffed out his chest confidently, stepping squarely in front of his wife in a pathetic display of misplaced chivalry. He looked at me with deep, seething resentment, clearly enraged that a black woman he considered entirely inferior was currently commanding the entire room. He slowly adjusted his expensive shiny silver cufflinks, completely oblivious to the massive, dangerous trap he was about to eagerly walk right into. "You have just made your little dramatic speech, Kendra," Preston sneered loudly, his voice dripping heavily with unearned superiority. "But you are clearly forgetting who actually holds the real power here today. I am a highly respected vice president at this massive firm. My prominent family brings generations of old money prestige to this business. You might have fooled the governor with some flashy tech startup, but you are absolutely nothing in the commercial real estate world. I will completely destroy your corporate reputation by tomorrow morning. You will be an absolute laughingstock." I stood perfectly still, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the ballroom amplify his empty threats. Preston smiled clearly, mistaking my silence for submission. He took another step forward, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his confidence swelling to completely delusional proportions. He looked around the room, specifically making eye contact with the other wealthy white investors and politicians, silently begging for their solidarity against the outspoken black woman who dared to disrupt their comfortable hierarchy. He wanted to put me back in my designated place. He wanted to remind me that no matter how much money I had acquired, I was still just an outsider in his exclusive world. "You see, Kendra, there are certain natural orders in the business world," Preston continued, his voice dripping with immense condescension. "You can buy a fancy green dress. You can manipulate a political campaign to earn a few favors. You can even trick the governor into thinking you are some brilliant financial mastermind. But real wealth, generational wealth, operates on a completely different level. My family has been shaping the economic landscape of this region for over a century. We have a pristine legacy." Warren recognized that elite pedigree when he brought me into his company. He handed me the keys to the kingdom because he knew I possessed the inherent business acumen required to manage a $50 million commercial portfolio. I handle the biggest acquisitions in the state. I sit in boardrooms you could never even dream of entering. You are completely out of your depth here." He crossed his arms, puffing out his chest as he delivered his final verdict. "So I am going to give you one last chance to salvage whatever shred of dignity you have left. Turn around, walk out those front doors, and pray. I do not make a few strategic phone calls tomorrow morning to have your little consulting firm permanently blacklisted from every major bank in Atlanta." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply let out a low melodic laugh that cut through his arrogant monologue like a freshly sharpened blade. I tilted my head, looking at him as if he were a particularly slow child, attempting to explain a complex math equation. "A $50 million commercial portfolio," I repeated slowly, letting the massive number hang in the quiet air. "That sounds incredibly impressive, Preston. It truly does. It sounds like the kind of massive responsibility reserved for a highly seasoned, brilliant executive. It sounds like the kind of operation that requires absolute transparency, flawless management, and rigorous financial oversight." Preston scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically. "It requires an elite pedigree, something you obviously lack. It actually requires regular banking audits." I corrected him smoothly. my tone dropping to a dead, terrifying calm. But you would not know anything about that, would you, Preston? Because you have spent the last 3 years operating under the complete assumption that your father-in-law would blindly protect you from any external scrutiny. You thought your prestigious last name and your white skin would act as a permanent, impenetrable shield against basic corporate accountability. My father stepped forward, his face pale and shining with cold sweat. Kendra, enough. You are rambling. Preston is a respected executive at my firm. You have absolutely no right to question his professional credentials. I have every right, Dad. I shot back, keeping my eyes locked firmly on Preston, because while Preston was busy playing golf at the country club and bragging about his old money heritage, the central banking institution that heavily underwrites your entire commercial real estate firm started noticing some massive glaring irregularities in his specific department. Preston's arrogant smirk instantly vanished. A sudden deep shadow of uncertainty flickered across his pale face. He uncrossed his arms, his hands twitching nervously at his sides. What are you talking about? Preston demanded, his voice suddenly losing its booming, confident edge. Banks do not like risk, Preston. I explained patiently, taking a deliberate step closer to him. They especially do not like massive, unexplained risks originating from a division managed by an unqualified nepotism hire. 6 months ago, the primary lending bank decided they needed an immediate, comprehensive, deeply forensic audit of the entire $50 million portfolio you supposedly manage with such elite business acumen. But they could not use their internal auditors. They needed a ruthless, completely independent third-party firm. A firm specializing in deep corporate espionage and crisis management. A firm that answers to absolutely no one except the federal financial regulators. I watched the exact moment the devastating reality began to slowly dawn on my father. Warren's jaw went completely slack. He looked at me in absolute, unadulterated horror as the pieces of the puzzle began connecting in his mind. He realized he had trusted the wrong person entirely. They hired Vanguard Private Equity. I stated clearly, my voice resonating with absolute, undeniable authority. They hired my firm, Preston. The memory of how this entire operation began played vividly in my mind as I watched the blood drain from Preston's face. Exactly 6 months ago, I was sitting in my corner office overlooking the Atlanta skyline when my secure private line rang. It was Arthur Pendleton, the chief risk officer for Georgia Central Bank, the primary financial institution that held the mortgages for my father's entire commercial real estate portfolio. Arthur was a ruthless, seasoned banker who did not believe in coincidences. Kendra, Arthur had said, his voice tight with professional anxiety. We have a severe bleeding problem in the Warren accounts. The debt-to-income ratios on their latest acquisitions are mathematically impossible. We suspect massive internal fraud, but Warren's executive board is tightly sealed. We need Vanguard to go in blind. We need your digital ghosts. I had immediately mobilized my top-tier cybersecurity unit, affectionately known inside Vanguard as the War Room. Led by Chloe, a brilliant former NSA data analyst, my team did not knock on the front doors of my father's corporate headquarters. We didn't send polite audit notifications. Under the strict legal authority granted by the bank's loan covenants, we quietly slipped through the back door of their outdated corporate firewall at 2 in the morning on a Sunday. What we found inside those servers was a masterclass in sheer, unadulterated hubris. Preston Vance, the supposedly brilliant vice president of acquisitions, with his pristine old money pedigree, possessed the operational security of a careless teenager. He had been given unrestricted, unmonitored access to the company's massive escrow accounts, simply because my father trusted his skin color and his last name implicitly. Warren had never bothered to implement dual authorization protocols for wire transfers exceeding $50,000, a standard industry practice, simply to avoid offending his precious son-in-law. Standing in the Vanguard War Room, staring at the massive digital smartboards, Chloe and I unraveled Preston's pathetic criminal web. It wasn't even sophisticated. Preston had set up 3 separate offshore shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands under painfully generic names: Osprey Holdings, Crescent Management, and Apex Supply Group. He would draft highly inflated fake invoices for non-existent construction materials and phantom legal consulting fees, routing them directly through his own department. Because he was the vice president, he approved his own fraudulent invoices. The funds were then quietly wired out of my father's operational accounts, effectively bleeding the company's liquidity dry month by month. But the sheer arrogance of Preston's digital footprint was what truly disgusted me. He didn't even try to hide his tracks. We discovered that he frequently used his official corporate email address to register for illicit underground sports betting syndicates based in Macau and Eastern Europe. We traced his IP address, noting that he would actively gamble away hundreds of thousands of dollars on high-stakes offshore poker tournaments while sitting at his mahogany desk in the corporate office, usually between 2:00 p.m. and 4:00 p.m. on Tuesday afternoons. His password for these illegal gambling sites, Old Money Vance 2024. It was almost insulting how easy it was to break him. The most devastating discovery, however, came during the third month of our covert audit. My father's company was rapidly running out of cash due to Preston's relentless skimming. To keep the lights on and maintain the illusion of profitability, Warren needed a rapid influx of capital. But instead of auditing his own books to find the leak, my father blindly authorized Preston to secure high-interest mezzanine loans using the company's crown jewel properties as collateral. We intercepted a localized VoIP phone call recorded on the company's internal server. It was a conversation between Preston and his offshore bookie. I remember standing in the sterile Cold War room, listening to the audio file play through the overhead speakers. "Don't worry about the 200 grand I owe you for the basketball finals." Preston's arrogant, distinctively nasal voice had echoed in the room. "I'm transferring it tomorrow. My father-in-law is completely clueless. The old man is so desperate for my family's social connections that he literally signs blank transfer authorizations just to keep me happy. It's like taking candy from a blind man." A profound silence had fallen over my forensics team. Chloe had looked at me expecting to see a daughter's heartbreak. Instead, she saw a CEO who had just been handed the ultimate lethal weapon. My father was not a criminal mastermind. He was a willing, negligent fool who had sacrificed his empire on the altar of racial insecurity and social climbing. By actively shielding a thief to maintain a flawless societal facade, Warren had legally breached every single fiduciary duty he owed to his lending banks. I didn't just report the findings back to Georgia Central Bank. I saw an unprecedented opportunity. I advised the bank that the Warren portfolio was a toxic liability on the verge of a catastrophic public collapse that would cost the bank tens of millions in negative press and lengthy bankruptcy litigation. I offered them a clean, immediate exit strategy. Vanguard Private Equity bought the entirety of my father's defaulted debt for pennies on the dollar in a closed-door cash transaction. I didn't just audit the empire. I legally purchased the executioner's axe. All of these months of silent, grueling digital surveillance, all the late nights tracing fraudulent wire transfers across international borders, culminated in this exact second in the grand ballroom. I snapped my focus back to the present moment, locking my intense gaze onto Preston's terrified, trembling form. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a cornered rat trapped in an expensive tuxedo. "You thought you were a genius," I said, resuming my verbal execution, making sure my voice carried to the wealthy investors, leaning in to listen. "You thought funneling $2 million through Osprey Holdings and Crescent Management was untraceable. You thought your Macau gambling buddies would protect your identity. But you forgot one crucial detail, Preston. In the digital age, every keystroke is permanent. Every single time you logged into your offshore betting accounts, using the corporate Wi-Fi, you left a massive glowing beacon pointing directly to your crimes." My father let out a choked gasp, physically stumbling backward as he heard the names of the shell companies. The puzzle pieces were finally slamming together in his mind, forming a horrifying picture of his own ruin. For the past 6 months, my elite team of forensic accountants has been quietly sitting inside your secure corporate servers. We have been reading every single email you ever sent. We have been tracking every single wire transfer you authorized. We have been meticulously analyzing every single property acquisition you supposedly negotiated on behalf of this family. We left absolutely no stone unturned in our sweeping investigation. Tasha grabbed Preston's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into his expensive tuxedo jacket. Her voice trembled with raw fear. Preston, what is she saying? Make her stop right now. Preston could not speak. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit doors. The wealthy guests surrounding us began murmuring in shocked realization. You tried to use your unearned privilege to silence me, but numbers do not care about your country club memberships. Math is completely honest. I pulled out my sleek smartphone, holding it up high. Your fake empire falls tonight. The blinding light from the massive projector screen illuminated the horrified faces of the ballroom guests, casting harsh shadows across Preston's rapidly paling skin. For a split second, the sheer magnitude of the financial theft paralyzed everyone standing near our table. Then the powerful delusion that had governed my mother's entire existence finally snapped. Brenda let out an ear-piercing, guttural shriek that completely drowned out the stunned whispers of the political donors and wealthy socialites. She shoved her way past my paralyzed father and aggressively placed her small frame directly between me and her precious son-in-law, spreading her arms wide as if shielding him from a physical barrage of bullets. "Turn that screen off right now!" My mother screamed, her voice cracking with violent hysteria. She pointed a trembling finger at my smartphone, her perfectly styled hair coming undone as she shook with absolute rage. "This is nothing but a disgusting fabricated lie. You forged every single one of those banking documents because you are eaten alive by your own bitter jealousy. You have spent your entire pathetic life envying your sister. You envy Tasha's beautiful complexion. You envy her flawless high society marriage. And you absolutely despise the fact that Preston comes from a refined, elegant background that you could never possibly attain." I watched Preston cower pathetically behind his mother-in-law, using an older black woman as a human shield while his fraudulent empire burned to ashes on the wall behind us. Tasha was openly sobbing now, her hands covering her mouth as she stared at the offshore bank routing numbers that matched the dates of her lavish luxury vacations. Despite the undeniable mathematical proof shining brightly above us, my mother absolutely refused to accept reality. To acknowledge Preston's staggering crimes would mean acknowledging her own colossal failure in judging character. It would mean admitting that the white man she worshipped was nothing more than a common thief stealing from her own husband. "You are a deeply sick, vindictive monster," Brenda continued to yell, stepping aggressively into my personal space. The heavy scent of her expensive perfume failed to mask the sour smell of her raw panic. "You orchestrated this entire malicious scheme just to ruin your father's milestone birthday gala. You manipulated the banking data to frame an innocent, hardworking executive. Preston is a saint who elevated this family's social standing the minute he married your sister. You are doing this to destroy the beautiful legacy Warren and I spent 4 decades building from the ground up." "I did not force Preston to gamble away $2 million on offshore betting sites, Mama," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotional reaction. "I did not force him to forge Dad's signature on those corporate transfer documents. The federal investigators have already seized his hard drives. Your blind devotion to his skin color and his fake pedigree will not save him from a federal prison sentence." My mother's eyes bulged with pure, unadulterated venom. The veins in her neck strained against her heavy diamond necklace. Realizing she could not refute the federal evidence I had just laid out, she immediately resorted to the only weapon she believed she still possessed. She went straight for the ultimate tool of financial control she had used to keep our entire extended family strictly in line for decades. "You listen to me, you ungrateful wretch!" she roared, her voice echoing violently through the grand ballroom. "As of this exact moment, I am completely stripping you of the Warren family name. I am calling our estate lawyers at dawn tomorrow to draft a brand new document. I am officially writing you completely out of your grandmother's generational trust fund. You are entirely disinherited." A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the captivated audience. In our affluent circle of Atlanta elites, the Warren Family Trust was legendary. It was not just about liquid cash or stock portfolios. It was fundamentally about the crown jewel of our generational wealth. You will never see a single dime of our money. Brenda declared, her chest heaving with exertion as she delivered her final desperate blow. You will never step foot on the ancestral estate in Louisiana ever again. That magnificent historic property has survived in our proud family for 4 entire generations. It is a symbol of Black excellence, triumph, and immense historical power. I am the sole legal executor of that pristine estate, and I swear before God and every prominent witness in this room that you will be permanently banned from the grounds. Tasha sniffled loudly, stepping out from behind her cowering husband to stand firmly beside my mother. She wiped her dramatic tears, finding sudden arrogant strength in my mother's vicious threats. You hear that, Kendra? Tasha sneered, her voice thick with pure malice. Mama is taking everything away from you. The Louisiana plantation, the downtown high-rise condos, the offshore family accounts. Everything goes to me and Preston now. You might have some temporary, flashy success with your little consulting firm, but you will never possess our true generational wealth. You are completely cut off. You are dead to this powerful family. My father remained completely silent, staring at the projector screen with a hollow, devastated expression, clearly doing the terrifying mental math of his impending financial ruin. Yet my mother stood tall, looking extremely proud of her cruel declaration. She genuinely believed she had just delivered the ultimate crushing checkmate. She truly thought the looming threat of losing the legendary Louisiana estate would finally force me to drop to my knees, beg for immediate forgiveness, and somehow retract the ironclad federal audit I had just exposed to the entire city. I stared at the arrogant women standing fiercely united in front of me, clinging desperately to a fictional fortune that no longer existed in reality. I gently placed my smartphone back into my emerald clutch, a very confident smile slowly spreading across my lips. You actually think you have won? Warren growled, stepping around my mother to confront me directly. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned a ghostly white. You think buying one foreclosed house and running a flashy audit makes you a power player in this city? You are nothing, Kendra. I still own 30 commercial buildings across the greater Atlanta metropolitan area. I sit on the board of directors for 3 different regional banks. The men in this very ballroom are my brothers, my fraternity brothers, my golfing partners, and my closest financial allies. I will use every single ounce of my influence to completely crush your little crisis management firm. I will have my billionaire friends blacklist you from every major corporate contract in the entire state of Georgia. I will sue you into absolute oblivion for defamation and corporate sabotage. By the time I am finished with you, you will be begging to scrub cafeteria floors again. I let his desperate, venomous tirade wash over me without breaking eye contact. The wealthy guests surrounding us murmured in agreement, fully expecting the powerful patriarch to reassert his dominance over his rebellious daughter. They expected me to shrink back to apologize, to show fear. Instead, I slowly shook my head, feeling a profound sense of pity for the man who had traded his soul for a crumbling facade. Your billionaire friends cannot save you, Dad, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. And you do not own 30 commercial buildings anymore. You do not own anything at all. Warren let out a harsh, barking laugh, looking frantically around the room as if seeking validation for my supposed insanity. I have the property deeds safely locked inside my corporate vault. My company generates millions in gross revenue every single quarter. You are just completely delusional. Your company has been operating deeply in the red for over 4 years. I countered, slicing through his manic laughter with cold, hard facts. Preston did not just start embezzling yesterday. He has been systematically bleeding your corporate accounts dry for 48 consecutive months. To hide his massive, gaping financial holes, and to maintain the incredibly lavish lifestyle Mama demanded, you started quietly taking out high-interest, risky mezzanine loans. You foolishly leveraged your entire commercial real estate portfolio against toxic predatory debt just to keep the lights on and the extravagant country club dues paid. My father's confident posture instantly collapsed. The remaining color drained rapidly from his face as the undeniable truth of my words physically hit him. Those private lending institutions do not care about your elite fraternity connections or your prestigious social standing. Dad. I continued, taking a deliberate step closer to him. When your debt-to-income ratio became dangerously unsustainable 3 months ago, your primary lenders decided they needed to quietly offload your highly toxic debt portfolio to minimize their own severe institutional risk. They put every single one of your commercial loans up for sale in a closed private equity market. They wanted to completely wash their hands of your rapidly failing business empire. Tasha let out a loud, dramatic sob, clutching Preston's arm, as if he could somehow magically protect her from the impending financial slaughter. Preston simply stared blankly down at the floor, completely paralyzed by his own monumental failure. "Who do you think bought that toxic debt, Dad?" I asked, lowering my voice so he had to lean in to hear his own destruction. Who do you think had the massive liquid capital required to purchase 30 defaulted commercial mortgages in a single fast, unfinanced cash transaction? Warren opened his mouth, but absolutely no sound came out. His breathing became incredibly shallow and rapid. "Vanguard Private Equity bought your debt," I announced, projecting my voice clearly, so the entire ballroom could witness the final crushing blow. "My firm bought every single one of your outstanding loans. I am your primary senior creditor. I legally own your corporate notes. I own the mortgages on your suburban office parks, your busy retail centers, and your luxury downtown high-rises. You owe my holding company $82 million. Brenda let out a terrified, strangled gasp, collapsing weakly against a nearby cocktail table. "And because you explicitly violated the restrictive covenants of those commercial loans by allowing your utterly unqualified son-in-law to embezzle massive corporate funds, you are currently in severe, irreversible default," I stated, delivering the fatal strike with absolute calculated precision. As the primary debt holder, I have the immediate legal right to call in the entirety of the loans. Since you obviously cannot produce $82 million in liquid cash tonight, my elite corporate attorneys have already filed the necessary paperwork with the state courts. At exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Vanguard Private Equity is officially executing a hostile takeover of your entire commercial real estate company. We are aggressively liquidating all of your remaining corporate assets to recoup our substantial investment. You no longer have an empire, Warren. You no longer have a legacy to proudly pass down to your favorite golden child daughter. You work for me now, and effective immediately, you are completely fired from the very same company you built. Warren's knees buckled under the immense weight of my declaration. He reached out blindly, his trembling hands desperately grasping the edge of a velvet chair to stop himself from crashing onto the polished marble floor. The mighty, untouchable patriarch was now completely broken. His expensive tailored tuxedo suddenly looked like a cheap, ill-fitting costume on a defeated, totally ruined man. The powerful politicians and wealthy business partners who had happily drank his expensive champagne just an hour ago were now actively stepping away from his table, treating him like a contagious disease. They understood the brutal, unforgiving nature of corporate warfare better than anyone present. They knew the reign of the Warren family was over. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open with a violent thud. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. Through the tall glass windows, the sharp glare of red and blue police lights began to flash wildly, casting harsh colors across the elegant crystal chandeliers. A line of men and women, wearing dark tactical jackets with bright yellow letters spelling out FBI and SEC, marched purposefully into the venue. They moved with absolute terrifying authority, ignoring the outraged gasps of the country club manager who tried to stop them at the door. I checked my diamond watch one more time. They were perfectly on schedule. I had meticulously coordinated this specific timeline with my federal contacts hours before I even stepped into my custom emerald gown. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a stern expression, scanned the massive crowd. His eyes locked directly onto our specific table. He bypassed the terrified waiters and the stunned political donors, making a straight, unwavering line toward Preston. Preston took one look at the approaching federal agents and completely lost any remaining shred of his arrogant composure. He stumbled backward, knocking over a towering display of expensive champagne flutes. The crystal shattered loudly against the polished marble floor, a fitting soundtrack to the absolute destruction of his fake privileged world. He tried to scramble behind my father again, but Warren instinctively stepped aside, abandoning his supposedly elite son-in-law to face the consequences alone. The lead agent stopped inches away from Preston and pulled out a gold badge. Preston Vance, you are under arrest for multiple felony counts of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and severe violations of federal securities laws. The agent announced, his booming voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Turn around and place your hands firmly behind your back. Preston held his hands up in a pathetic, trembling gesture of surrender. His face was entirely devoid of blood, making him look like a terrified ghost. You cannot do this to me, Preston shouted, his voice cracking horribly. Do you have any idea who my family is? We have old money. We are major political donors. I am a powerful vice president. You are making a massive career-ending mistake. The agent did not even blink at the desperate, entitled outburst. He simply grabbed Preston by the shoulder, forcefully spinning him around, and snapped a heavy pair of steel handcuffs onto his wrists. The sharp metallic click echoed loudly through the completely silent room. Tasha let out a blood-curdling scream that tore through the grand ballroom. She lunged forward, her expensive white designer dress snagging on a broken piece of crystal as she desperately tried to reach her husband. Let him go right now, she shrieked, grabbing wildly at the agent's tactical jacket. He is an innocent man. My sister framed him because she is a bitter, jealous sociopath. Two additional agents stepped forward, physically blocking Tasha and pushing her firmly back toward our table. Step back immediately, or you will be arrested for interfering with an active investigation, a female agent warned. Tasha collapsed onto her knees, sobbing hysterically into her hands, completely ruining her flawless makeup. My mother, Brenda, could no longer handle the overwhelming, catastrophic reality crashing down upon her carefully curated life. The sheer social humiliation of watching her favored white son-in-law being dragged away in handcuffs right in front of her high society church friends and elite country club peers was simply too much for her fragile ego to bear. She let out a weak gasp, clutched her heavy pearl necklace tightly, and fully fainted, collapsing onto the carpeted floor. My father did not even try to catch her. Warren stood completely frozen, staring at the federal agents with wide, terrified eyes. He looked entirely broken, a hollow shell of the domineering patriarch who had cruelly ordered me to leave through the kitchen just an hour ago. He slowly turned his gaze toward me, his expression shifting from anger to absolute crushing despair. He finally realized that by choosing to blindly trust a con artist, simply because of his race and supposed pedigree, he had actively destroyed his own massive legacy. Kendra, my father whispered, his voice trembling so badly it was barely audible. Please, you have to stop this. You have to call them off. I will give you anything you want. I will give you the entire company. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The little girl who used to desperately crave his approval had died a very long time ago. I already took the company, Dad, I replied, my voice perfectly steady and ice cold. And I cannot call off the federal government. You built your entire life on lies, status, and sheer cruelty. Tonight is just the bill finally coming due. The federal agents forcefully marched Preston through the parted sea of horrified gala guests. The wealthy attendees pulled their expensive smartphones out, shamelessly recording the spectacular downfall of the Warren family. Preston kept his head down, desperately trying to hide his tear-stained face from the flashing cameras. He was no longer the arrogant executive throwing $100 bills at my feet. He was just a common criminal being dragged into the cold night. Tasha remained on the floor, wailing uncontrollably as she watched her fake life disappear out the front doors. A few waiters rushed to fan my unconscious mother, but none of her elite friends stepped forward to offer help. They were already distancing themselves from the toxic fallout. I took one final look at the absolute wreckage of my family. I smoothed out the front of my emerald gown, picked up my clutch, and turned my back on them forever. Governor Sterling gave me a respectful nod of approval as I approached the exit. I walked past the murmuring crowds, stepped out the grand doors, and breathed in the fresh, very sweet, undeniable air of my absolute freedom. The morning sun rose over the Atlanta skyline, casting a warm golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown penthouse. I stood quietly on the expansive glass balcony, a steaming cup of dark roast coffee in my hand, looking out at the waking city. The cool breeze felt incredibly refreshing, a stark contrast to the suffocating air of the country club ballroom just hours prior. I had slept remarkably well. There was no lingering guilt, no creeping anxiety, and certainly no remorse. For the first time in 34 years, my mind was entirely clear. I walked back inside and set my mug on the sleek granite kitchen island. My custom-configured smartphone resting silently on the counter was an absolute war zone of notifications. The news of the spectacular raid had broken long before dawn. Every major local television station, financial news outlet, and prominent Atlanta society blog was aggressively running the story. High society scandal as real estate executive arrested at Milestone Gala. Federal agents seize assets linked to Warren commercial properties. I watched a brief clip on a popular society blog showing Preston being shoved into a dark federal vehicle, his arrogant face contorted in sheer terror, while my mother lay unconscious on the ballroom carpet. The internet was absolutely tearing them apart, ruthlessly dismantling their fake, prestigious legacy piece by piece. The comment sections were filled with former business partners and rival socialites, expressing their deep performative shock, all while secretly reveling in my family's total destruction. My personal call log was a rapidly growing list of desperation. There were 42 missed calls from my father, 57 from my mother, and countless text messages alternating wildly between vicious, hateful threats and pathetic weeping pleas for financial mercy. I slowly scrolled through the chaotic messages, reading them with a detached, clinical fascination. My father's initial texts were predictably aggressive, demanding that I immediately contact his legal team to undo the hostile takeover, threatening to sue me for every penny I owned. But as the long night wore on, and the terrifying reality of his total bankruptcy set in, his tone drastically shifted. His final message, sent at 4 in the morning, simply read, "Kendra, please answer the phone. We have absolutely nothing left." My mother's voicemails were even more unhinged. She oscillated between screaming that I was an evil, vindictive demon who had permanently ruined her social standing to loudly sobbing that she was going to be thrown out onto the street. She begged me to release the funds, promising that we could sit down and work things out like a real family. The sheer hypocrisy of her sudden desire for family unity, only hours after publicly disowning me and violently slapping my face, was truly astounding. I deleted every single voicemail without a second thought. I had absolutely no intention of answering their calls. I had already spoken my final piece. Peace in the federal justice system was currently handling the rest of the conversation. I was just finishing my coffee when a sudden sharp buzzing from my private elevator entrance shattered the quiet morning atmosphere. My building employed top-tier ex-military security personnel, so an unannounced visitor making it to the penthouse floor was highly unusual. I walked over to the security monitor and checked the camera feed. My sister Tasha was standing frantically outside my heavy oak doors. She looked like an absolute spectacular wreck. She was still wearing the same white designer gown from the gala, but the expensive fabric was now torn, severely wrinkled, and stained with spilled champagne. Her flawless high society makeup was completely ruined, leaving dark, messy streaks of mascara running down her flushed cheeks. She had somehow managed to bypass the front desk, likely by aggressively manipulating a newly hired concierge with her usual toxic blend of tears and entitled demands. I considered ignoring her completely and calling security to have her forcibly removed, but a small, calculating part of my mind wanted to see exactly how low the golden child was willing to sink. I pressed a button on the wall panel, unlocking the heavy double doors. Tasha practically fell into the marble foyer, gasping for air as if she had just run a marathon. She looked wildly around the massive, luxurious penthouse, her bloodshot eyes taking in the modern art, the expensive designer furniture, and the breathtaking panoramic views of the city. Kendra, you have to help me right now. Tasha gasped, her voice trembling violently as she rushed toward me. They denied Preston's bail. The federal judge said he is a massive flight risk because of the offshore accounts. They have completely frozen all of our personal bank accounts, our joint credit cards, and the investment portfolios. I went to buy a coffee this morning, and my card was violently declined in front of everyone. She stood there trembling, expecting me to immediately drop everything and fix her superficial problems. I crossed my arms, looking at her with cold indifference. And exactly why is your declined credit card my problem, Tasha? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Tasha's eyes widened in genuine disbelief, as if she could not comprehend why I was not rushing to save her. Because you caused this entire disaster, you set him up, Kendra. You have to wire me the money for a high-powered defense attorney immediately. I need at least $500,000 by noon, or he is going to be transferred to a maximum security federal holding facility. I also need cash to keep the house running, to pay the country club dues, and to maintain my lifestyle. I cannot be seen living like a poor person. You can afford to bail my husband out and fix this mess. I stared at the entitled woman standing in my home, begging for $500,000 to save the very man who had thrown money at my feet less than 12 hours ago. Tasha shifted uncomfortably under my silent, unyielding gaze, but her arrogance quickly overrode her temporary panic. She believed she was entitled to my wealth simply because we shared the same parents. She crossed the marble foyer, her heels clicking loudly, and slammed her hands down on my granite kitchen island. Are you deaf, Kendra? I just told you exactly what I need to fix this situation. Preston is sitting in a cold federal holding cell right now, surrounded by common criminals. I is completely terrified. You proved your little point last night, and you got your revenge against Warren. Now it is time to be the bigger person and write the check. We are a family, and we have to protect our own. I slowly picked up my coffee mug and took a long, deliberate sip. The dark roast tasted bitter and warm. Protect our own, I repeated, my voice echoing slightly in the massive vaulted penthouse. That is a fascinating choice of words, Tasha. When exactly did I become part of our own in your eyes? Was it when you realized my bank account has commas you cannot even fathom? Or was it when the FBI seized your offshore accounts? Tasha scowled, her face turning red as she attempted to pivot her strategy. She leaned forward, using a conspiratorial tone that she usually reserved for gossip at her brunches. Do not do this to us, Kendra. You know exactly how the federal justice system targets Black families and the people connected to them. We have to maintain absolute solidarity against outsiders trying to tear down our legacy. You owe it to the culture, and you absolutely owe it to the blood running through your veins to protect this family from public ruin. Black family loyalty means we stick together no matter what happens behind closed doors. I laughed out loud, a sound that made Tasha physically flinch. Do not you dare stand in my house and weaponize Black family loyalty against me, I warned, stepping around the kitchen island to face her directly. Where was that sacred solidity when you were relentlessly mocking my natural hair and my darker skin tone in front of your lighter privileged friends? You spent our entire childhood treating me like an ugly, unwanted accessory just so you could secure your position as Brenda's flawless doll. You alienated me at every single family gathering. You told your wealthy sorority sisters I was the embarrassing poor relative who could not afford to keep up with your lifestyle. Tasha opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a firm hand, cutting her off instantly. Where was your sisterly loyalty when I begged you for a loan to fix my broken car during my sophomore year of college? I had to walk 3 miles in the freezing rain to my overnight shift because my transmission died. You laughed in my face and told me that struggling builds character. You said that while holding a $10,000 designer handbag that Dad bought you for getting a failing grade on a midterm exam. You loved watching me suffer, Tasha. My pain was the foundation of your superiority complex. Tasha's lower lip began to tremble. The facade was rapidly crumbling, leaving behind a terrified, helpless woman who possessed zero survival skills. That was in the past, Kendra. We were just kids and Mama pitted us against each other. You cannot hold on to that ancient history when my husband is facing 10 years in a federal penitentiary. I will lose my house. I will lose my country club membership. My friends are already ignoring my text messages. I have nothing left. Then you had better learn how to fill out a job application, I stated coldly, showing zero mercy. Because you are not getting a single cent from me. I am not bailing out a white man who eagerly stole from our father just to fund your fake millionaire lifestyle. Preston made his criminal bed and now you both get to lie in it. You wanted to marry into old money so desperately that you ignored the con artist. You wanted a trophy husband to parade around Atlanta and now you have a convicted felon. Tasha fell to her knees on the floor. She grabbed the hem of my emerald robe, sobbing hysterically. Please, Kendra, I am begging you, I cannot survive out there. I do not know how to be poor. I do not know how to work a normal job. Please just give me a loan. I will pay you back every single dime. I firmly pulled my robe out of her desperate, grasping hands and took a deliberate step back. You have never worked a single day in your entire life, Tasha. I pressed the security intercom. Marcus, I have an unauthorized intruder in my penthouse. Please send 2 guards up immediately to escort her off the premises. Tasha scrambled to her feet, her face contorted in a mixture of terror and absolute rage. You are a monster, she screamed, her voice echoing wildly around the apartment. You are completely heartless. Mama was right about you. You will die alone in this giant empty glass box because you have no soul. I would rather die alone in my own fortress than live another second in your toxic shadow, I replied smoothly, crossing my arms over my chest. You chose Preston. You chose the lies. You chose to protect a thief because you loved the status he provided. Now you get to experience exactly what it feels like to be cut off from the Warren family money. Except this time the money actually belongs to me. The heavy double doors behind Tasha slid open with a soft hum. 2 muscular security guards stepped into the foyer. They looked at Tasha's champagne-stained gown and her chaotic makeup with cold professional indifference. Ma'am, it is time for you to leave. Tasha did not go quietly. She thrashed and screamed, her expensive heels dragging across the polished marble floor of my foyer as the guards expertly maneuvered her toward the private elevator. I stood perfectly still, watching the heavy metal doors slide shut, instantly cutting off her frantic, high-pitched wailing. The silence that fell over my penthouse was absolute and incredibly peaceful. I had finally severed the heaviest, most toxic chain binding me to my past. But my work was not entirely finished. The true dismantling of the Warren Empire required a much more formal setting than my residential foyer. 48 hours later, I sat at the head of a massive mahogany conference table inside the executive boardroom of Vanguard Private Equity. My office occupied the entire top floor of a sleek glass skyscraper in Midtown Atlanta, offering a commanding, uninterrupted view of the very commercial real estate landscape my father used to control. The room was deliberately designed to intimidate. Cold steel accents, floor-to-ceiling windows, and an army of the most ruthless corporate attorneys in the state sitting faithfully by my side. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. Warren and Brenda walked in, flanked by 3 highly paid, visibly sweating defense attorneys. The contrast between my parents today and the arrogant couple who had tried to humiliate me at the country club Gala was staggering. My father looked as though he had aged a decade over the weekend. His usually impeccable posture was slumped, and his custom-tailored suit seemed to hang loosely on his suddenly diminished frame. My mother wore a dark conservative dress, gripping her designer handbag tightly against her chest like a protective shield. She refused to make direct eye contact with me, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on the polished wood of the conference table as she took her seat. Their lead attorney, an older man with silver hair and a nervous disposition, cleared his throat loudly to break the suffocating tension. He opened a thick leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of heavily redacted financial documents. Ms. Warren, we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us this morning. The lawyer began, his voice dripping with forced professional courtesy. We are here to discuss the abrupt transfer of the commercial debt portfolios. and to hopefully negotiate a mutually beneficial resolution regarding your father's company. There is no Ms. Warren in this room. I corrected him smoothly, leaning back in my plush leather executive chair. I legally dropped that toxic last name 7 years ago. You will address me as Madam CEO, or you will not address me at all. And let us be completely clear about why you are actually sitting here. You are not here to negotiate a mutually beneficial resolution. You are here because your clients are drowning in $82 million of highly toxic defaulted debt, and I am the only person holding the life raft. The silver-haired lawyer swallowed hard, visibly shaken by my absolute lack of corporate pleasantries. He looked to my father for guidance, but Warren simply stared at the blank notepad in front of him. "Kendra, please!" My mother suddenly blurted out, breaking her silence. Her voice trembled, lacking all of its usual domineering authority. "We have been completely humiliated in the press. Our friends at the church are ignoring our phone calls. The social blogs are ripping our family legacy to shreds. You have proven your point to everyone. You showed the entire city how powerful you are. Now we need to handle this quietly behind closed doors like a real family." I let out a low, humorless laugh that made my mother physically flinch. "Like a real family, is that the strategy we are going with today, Mama? You want to rely on the sacred bond of family to secure a massive financial discount?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool mahogany table, my eyes locking onto hers. Where was this desperate need for family unity on my 18th birthday? Do you remember that specific morning I was packing my bags for my freshman year of college? Instead of giving me a graduation gift or a hug, you and Dad handed me a formal itemized invoice. You literally tried to charge me back rent for the bedroom I grew up in, claiming that since I was legally an adult, I needed to learn the harsh realities of capitalism. My father closed his eyes, a deep grimace of shame crossing his face. "You demanded I pay you $500 a month just to sleep in my own childhood bed while I scrambled to find off-campus housing." I continued, my voice sharp and relentless. "You told me that nothing in this world is free and that family ties do not exempt anyone from their financial obligations. You treated me like a burdensome tenant instead of a daughter. So I am simply applying the exact same business model you taught me. Nothing is free, Mama. I do not offer family discounts, especially to people who actively funded my sister's lavish lifestyle while deliberately sabotaging my future." Warren finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and pleading. "We know we failed you, Kendra. I was blind to what Preston was doing, and I was wrong to dismiss your true potential. I am openly admitting my absolute failure as a businessman and as a father. But if you execute this hostile takeover and liquidate my remaining assets, it will not just ruin me. It will completely destroy our strong reputation in the Atlanta business community forever. We will be left with absolutely nothing at all. We are just asking for a very reasonable restructuring plan. Give us a 5-year grace period to sell off the severely underperforming commercial properties and pay you back the base principal amount. You can gracefully save our public image and still get your money." Exactly 30 days after our fateful boardroom meeting, the heavy iron gates of my parents' sprawling suburban estate swung open to admit a large fleet of massive moving trucks. I sat quietly in the back of my tinted luxury sedan, parked just across the pristine street, watching the final physical dismantling of the Warren family empire. The crisp autumn air felt incredibly sharp, perfectly matching the ruthless precision of the asset seizure currently unfolding. My elite legal team had left them with absolutely no loopholes, no hidden accounts, and zero leverage. Every piece of valuable furniture, every expensive imported rug, and every piece of custom artwork they had purchased to impress their elite social circle now legally belonged to my holding company. I watched impassively as two burly movers carried out the antique grandfather clock that used to sit in the grand foyer. My mother, Brenda, stood on the wide front porch, her arms wrapped tightly around her thin shoulders as she shivered in the brisk morning breeze. She was no longer wearing her customary designer silk dresses or heavy diamond jewelry. The federal authorities had systematically confiscated every luxury item purchased with Preston's embezzled funds, leaving her in a plain, faded tracksuit. The sheer indignity of the public eviction was actively tearing my mother apart. For over 3 decades, Brenda had ruthlessly ruled the affluent black high society of Atlanta with an iron fist, using this exact mansion as her impenetrable fortress of social superiority. She had hosted countless extravagant charity galas, elite church fundraisers, and exclusive sorority luncheons in that very house, constantly using her immense wealth to belittle anyone she deemed inferior. Now, the tables had spectacularly turned. The same wealthy megachurch pastors and prominent political donors who used to eagerly drink her expensive imported champagne were currently treating her like a highly contagious disease. I watched a sleek black Mercedes slowly drive past the estate. I instantly recognized the driver as Mrs. Higgins, the powerful head of the Church Beautification Committee, and my mother's former best friend. Brenda eagerly raised her hand to wave a desperate, pathetic smile stretching across her face, hoping for a tiny shred of solidarity. Mrs. Higgins did not even slow down. She simply turned her head, actively ignoring my mother's frantic wave, and accelerated down the pristine tree-lined street. Brenda's hand dropped limply to her side, her shoulders shaking as the crushing weight of her permanent social cancellation finally materialized. My father, Warren, slowly walked out the heavy front doors, carrying a single small cardboard box containing his remaining personal documents. The mighty commercial real estate tycoon, a man who had once proudly controlled a $50 million corporate portfolio, was now reduced to carrying his entire life in a flimsy recycled box. He looked completely defeated, his back bent under the heavy burden of his monumental failure. He had traded his own daughter's future to protect a fraudulent, arrogant son-in-law, simply because he valued a white man's fake pedigree over my actual brilliance. This devastating eviction was the ultimate, inescapable consequence of his deeply flawed, toxic priorities. I stepped out of my sedan, my expensive heels clicking sharply against the cold pavement. I wanted them to look me directly in the eyes as they officially surrendered the very last symbol of their fake, unearned status. As I walked up the long, winding driveway, my mother physically recoiled, desperately hiding behind my broken father. Warren stopped walking, placing his small cardboard box on the stone steps. He looked at me with hollow, bloodshot eyes that held absolutely zero fight. "Are you completely satisfied now, Kendra?" Warren asked, his voice nothing more than a hoarse, raspy whisper. "You took the entire company. You took the bank accounts. You sent my son-in-law to a federal holding facility. Now you are literally throwing your own parents out onto the street. You have successfully destroyed everything we spent our entire lives building. I hope this ruthless revenge brings you the peace you so desperately crave." I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, crossing my arms over my tailored trench coat. "I did not destroy your legacy, Dad," I replied, my tone perfectly, even and completely devoid of any guilt. "You actively destroyed it yourselves the exact minute you decided to fund a criminal enterprise, just to maintain a shallow, superficial image. I am simply cleaning up the massive toxic mess you recklessly created. You are not being thrown onto the street. My corporate attorneys generously secured a small, one-bedroom apartment for you on the south side of the city. The rent is fully paid for the next 3 months. After that, you will have to find basic employment and pay your own living expenses just like everyone else." Brenda immediately let out a loud, dramatic sob, covering her tear-stained face with her trembling hands. "A one-bedroom apartment on the south side," she wailed, her voice cracking horribly. "We cannot possibly live in that terrible neighborhood. It is completely unsafe, and the apartments are practically closets. How am I supposed to show my face in public if I am living in a run-down tiny apartment? My church friends will absolutely laugh at me." I looked at my mother with a profound, chilling emptiness. "Your church friends have already completely abandoned you, Mama," I stated bluntly, destroying her final pathetic delusion. "They isolated you the exact moment the federal agents raided the country club Gala. You have absolutely no social standing left to protect. Your pristine reputation is entirely gone, and this grand mansion belongs to my equity firm now. It is time for you to leave." I turned around and walked back down the long driveway, leaving my toxic parents standing completely alone on the cold stone steps. They slowly walked towards their battered, heavily used sedan. As they drove away toward their bleak, cramped new reality, I finally felt a deep, overwhelming sense of absolute closure. Through the meticulous daily reports filed by the private investigators I hired to oversee the asset seizure, I was fully aware of the exact psychological nightmare my parents had walked into. The apartment I had legally secured for them was located in a sprawling concrete complex on the south side of Atlanta. It was a neighborhood Brenda had spent her entire adult life actively avoiding and relentlessly mocking at her elite charity galas. The unit was a cramped 400-square-foot box with peeling linoleum floors that perpetually smelled of industrial bleach and stale cooking oil. The walls were paper-thin, vibrating violently whenever the neighbors played their music or argued in the narrow hallway. Brenda's psychological break began almost the exact moment she stepped through the dented metal front door. My mother, a woman who used to complain if the imported orchids in her sprawling foyer were not arranged symmetrically, was now confronted by a rusted radiator and a laminate kitchen counter stained with cheap coffee. Her denial was immediate and absolute. Instead of unpacking their meager remaining clothes, she carefully unwrapped a single, surviving Wedgwood china teacup she had managed to smuggle past the federal asset auditors. She placed it perfectly in the center of the scratched dining table, as if anchoring herself to a rapidly sinking ship. Every morning, Brenda would follow a terrifying, deeply delusional routine. She would wake up at 7:00 a.m. meticulously, apply her remaining high-end cosmetics, and put on a faded out-of-season designer silk dress. She would sit on a cheap sagging futon, the only piece of furniture in the living room, and stare at her silent, prepaid cell phone. She spent hours furiously dialing the numbers of the prominent megachurch pastors, the wealthy senators' wives, and her elite sorority sisters. Call after call went directly to voicemail. The relentless, deafening silence of a society that had completely erased her existence slowly drove her to madness. For a narcissist whose entire self-worth was dictated by public admiration and social dominance, being entirely ignored was a psychological torture far worse than any physical pain. She was finally experiencing the exact suffocating invisibility she had forced upon me for 18 years. Warren, conversely, retreated into a catatonic state of profound, crushing depression. The mighty real estate tycoon, who once proudly controlled 30 commercial buildings, now spent his days staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper. The realization that he had traded his brilliant self-made daughter for an arrogant racist con artist had completely broken his spirit. To pay for their basic groceries and the soaring utility bills, once my 3-month grace period expired, Warren was forced to take a profoundly humiliating job. He became a night shift security guard at a dilapidated strip mall. The brutal irony was inescapable while I commanded an elite international cybersecurity empire from a glass penthouse. My father was patrolling a cracked parking lot in a stiff polyester uniform for $12 an hour. Whenever he returned to the cramped apartment at dawn, smelling of stale sweat and cheap coffee, Brenda would viciously berate him, screaming that he was a failure who had ruined her flawless legacy. For the first time in 40 years of marriage, Warren finally snapped. He stopped apologizing. He looked at his shrieking wife, dropped his heavy security flashlight on the floor, and told her that her toxic vanity was the real cancer that had eaten their family alive. Their tiny apartment became a daily, inescapable purgatory of mutual hatred and crushing regret. While my parents were tearing each other apart in their Southside prison, my golden child sister was facing her own brutal reckoning with reality. Tasha's descent into poverty was not a slow, graceful slide. It was a violent, terrifying freefall. Long before she was forced to fold denim at the suburban mall, she had to confront the immediate paralyzing fear of genuine hunger. With Preston's accounts frozen by the FBI and her own luxury credit cards aggressively canceled by my holding company, Tasha found herself staring at a completely empty refrigerator in her heavily downgraded mediocre apartment. The reports of her spectacular social downfall echoed rapidly through the Atlanta grapevine. The most defining moment of her new miserable existence occurred on a rainy Tuesday evening, inside a crowded discount grocery store, a place Tasha had once publicly claimed she would rather die than step foot in. Stripped of her pristine white designer gowns and heavy diamond bracelets, she was wearing oversized sweatpants and a worn-out hoodie, desperately hoping to remain unrecognized beneath the harsh flickering fluorescent lights. She navigated the narrow, crowded aisles with a red plastic handbasket, her hands trembling as she meticulously checked the price tags on generic brands of pasta and canned beans. She was mentally calculating the total, terrified of exceeding the meager $40 she had scraped together by selling her last piece of non-confiscated jewelry to a shady downtown pawnshop. As she reached for a box of heavily discounted cereal, a sharply manicured hand reached out and grabbed the premium organic brand right next to it. Tasha, oh my God, is that actually you? Tasha froze. The blood drained entirely from her face. Standing right beside her wearing an immaculate Chanel trench coat and holding a purebred teacup poodle was Chloe Sterling, one of the wealthiest, most ruthless socialites from Tasha's former country club inner circle. Chloe was exactly the type of woman Tasha used to eagerly gossip with over $500 champagne brunches. Tasha desperately tried to pull the hood over her unstyled hair, her eyes darting frantically toward the exit. Chloe, hi. I'm just running a quick errand for a maid. We are trying a new charity outreach program. The lie was so pathetic, so transparently desperate, that Chloe actually let out a short, mocking laugh. Chloe's sharp, judgmental eyes slowly scanned Tasha's stained sweatpants, the cheap plastic handbasket, and the generic off-brand cans of soup. The fake high society smile that spread across Chloe's face was dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to lie anymore. Chloe cooed, her voice intentionally loud enough for the surrounding working-class shoppers to hear. We all saw the news about Preston's federal indictment, and we all heard about how your brilliant sister completely dismantled your father's fake empire. It is just such a tragic, horrifying cautionary tale. Everyone at the country club is simply exhausted from talking about your family's massive, embarrassing fraud. Chloe leaned in closer, the heavy scent of her expensive Tom Ford perfume completely overpowering the smell of discount produce. I was going to invite you to my summer gala in the Hamptons, but clearly you are struggling just to afford basic carbohydrates. If you ever need a job scrubbing my pool house, my assistant has my card. Hang in there, sweetie. Chloe offered a patronizing pat on Tasha's shoulder before strutting gracefully toward the checkout lanes, leaving my sister standing completely paralyzed in the cereal aisle. Tasha abandoned the plastic basket on the floor, the cans of generic beans spilling out, and practically ran out of the sliding glass doors into the freezing rain. She collapsed into the driver's seat of her beat-up used car, the only vehicle she could afford after the federal asset forfeiture, and sobbed so violently she choked. In that cramped, damp car, the final illusion of her unearned superiority shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Her lighter skin, her supposed pedigree, and her arrogant white trophy husband had provided absolutely zero protection against the ruthless reality of the real world. Tasha finally realized that without my father's stolen money, she was entirely invisible. She was a ghost, haunting a life she could no longer afford. The golden child had been completely devoured by the very same superficial, toxic beast she and my mother had worshipped their entire lives. Reading those intelligence reports in my penthouse, I didn't feel a shred of pity. I simply poured myself a glass of expensive bourbon, raised it to the glittering city skyline, and toasted to the undeniable beauty of poetic justice. 6 months after my parents surrendered their sprawling estate, the chilling reality of federal justice finally caught up to my arrogant brother-in-law. The sweltering heat of an Atlanta summer hung heavily over the downtown federal courthouse as I walked through the imposing metal detectors. I was not there as a grieving family member seeking emotional closure. I was officially subpoenaed as the primary forensic auditor and chief executive officer of Vanguard Private Equity. The massive courtroom was packed to absolute capacity with local journalists, former business partners, and curious socialites, eager to witness the final dismantling of the Warren corporate empire. I took my designated seat in the front row, smoothing my sharp black tailored suit. Across the aisle, my parents sat together looking incredibly small and utterly exhausted. Warren stared blankly ahead, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Brenda clutched a crumpled tissue, her eyes darting nervously around the austere room. Preston sat at the defense table looking completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, untouchable executive who had thrown a crisp $100 bill at my feet was entirely gone. He wore a poorly fitting gray suit. His posture slumped, his face pale and shining with a desperate, terrified sweat. The trial had been a brutal, highly publicized spectacle for 3 agonizing weeks. Preston and his expensive defense attorneys knew they could not possibly deny the missing millions. The bank transfers were completely indisputable. Therefore, they decided to deploy a predictable, deeply offensive legal strategy. They attempted to weaponize his race and his supposed old money pedigree against my father. When Preston finally took the stand in his own defense, he immediately launched into a calculated, entirely fabricated narrative. He painted himself as a naive, trusting young man who had been viciously manipulated by a powerful, corrupt black real estate mogul. Preston looked directly at the jury and swore under oath that Warren had explicitly ordered every single offshore transfer. He claimed Warren was desperately trying to hide corporate losses and forced him to sign the financial documents under the strict threat of termination. Preston portrayed himself as a helpless victim of my father's ruthless corporate greed, hoping the jury would naturally sympathize with his carefully rehearsed tears. A heavy, sickening murmur rippled through the courtroom as Preston spun his disgusting lies. I watched my father physically recoil in his wooden seat, his face registering the ultimate crushing betrayal. Warren had sacrificed his own daughter, risked his entire generational wealth, and enabled this man for years only to be thrown directly under the bus. The second federal prison became a reality. The defense attorney paced aggressively in front of the jury box, pointing a highly accusatory finger at my broken father. He argued passionately that Preston lacked the sophisticated financial knowledge required to orchestrate such a massive embezzlement scheme, insisting that Warren was the true criminal mastermind, pulling all the strings from the shadows. It was a perfectly executed performance designed to shift all federal accountability onto an older black man whose business was already in ruins. However, their entire racist, manipulative defense strategy completely evaporated the exact moment the federal prosecutor called me to the witness stand. I swore to tell the truth, sat down, and adjusted the microphone with steady, absolute confidence. The prosecutor walked me through the extensive forensic audit my elite cybersecurity team had conducted on the company servers. I did not rely on emotional arguments or family history. I weaponized cold, hard, indisputable mathematics. I clearly presented the meticulously traced digital footprints linking Preston's personal computer directly to the offshore Cayman Island shell companies. I displayed the highly encrypted emails where Preston actively coordinated the massive transfers with illegal underground sports betting syndicates. I mathematically proved that the missing $2 million perfectly matched Preston's catastrophic gambling debts down to the very last cent. The defense attorney desperately tried to cross-examine me, attempting to rattle my composure by bringing up my strained relationship with my father. He asked if I was intentionally framing Preston just to punish Warren for our past grievances. I simply smiled, looking directly into the lawyer's eyes. I calmly explained that the federal blockchain tracking algorithms utilized by my firm do not possess personal emotions, family vendettas, or racial biases. I explicitly showed the jury how my father's personal login credentials had been severely compromised by a specific malware program that Preston had secretly purchased and installed himself. My ironclad forensic audit completely severed Warren from any criminal intent or active participation in the embezzlement scheme. While my father was undeniably guilty of gross negligence, reckless nepotism, and severe financial mismanagement, I legally proved he was absolutely not a federal criminal. Preston's face turned a sickening shade of purple as he realized his ultimate escape route had been sealed shut by the woman he deemed inferior. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. The jury did not need a full afternoon to reach their final decision. They returned to the silent courtroom just 3 hours later, with a unanimous, resounding guilty verdict on all counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, and severe corporate embezzlement. The federal judge, A stern woman who had zero tolerance for wealthy entitlement stared down at Preston with profound disgust. She delivered a scathing rebuke of his cowardly attempt to place the blame on his father-in-law. She slammed her wooden gavel down, sentencing Preston to a brutal 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Tasha let out a devastating scream from the gallery, collapsing into her chair as two armed marshals approached the defense table. They commanded Preston to stand, pulling his arms behind his back. The metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed throughout the courtroom, signaling the undeniable end of his fraudulent existence. Warren sat frozen, letting out a long breath of pure relief mixed with devastation. He narrowly escaped a federal prison sentence solely because of the daughter he discarded. I watched as Preston was dragged away. The heavy steel doors of the federal penitentiary slammed shut on Preston's life, and by extension they slammed shut on Tasha's entire fabricated existence. For her entire life, my younger sister had effortlessly floated on a thick, gilded cloud of unearned privilege. She had never paid a bill, never negotiated a salary, and never understood the crushing weight of genuine financial terror. With Preston locked away in a federal cell for the next decade, and my parents completely stripped of their commercial real estate fortune, Tasha found herself entirely cut off from the endless fountain of generational wealth she had always taken for granted. The sprawling suburban mansion she shared with Preston was swiftly seized by federal authorities to pay off the massive restitution judgments. She was given exactly 48 hours to pack her personal belongings and vacate the premises. Tasha was forced to move into a cramped, aggressively mediocre apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The thin, uninsulated walls and the rattling window air conditioning unit were a harsh daily reminder of her spectacular fall from high society grace. Without the protective shield of our father's corporate credit cards or her husband's stolen millions, the terrifying reality of basic survival quickly set in. Her extravagant, carefully curated lifestyle required massive amounts of liquid cash, a resource she suddenly lacked entirely. Tasha attempted to reach out to her wealthy sorority sisters and her elite country club friends, desperately seeking a temporary financial bailout or a luxurious guest house to crash in. Every single one of those so-called friends conveniently stopped answering her frantic text messages. In the ruthless, status-obsessed circles of Atlanta's elite, associating with the destitute wife of a convicted federal embezzler was an absolute social death sentence. Tasha was completely abandoned by the very same people she had spent years trying to impress. Driven by sheer undeniable desperation, Tasha was forced to systematically liquidate her entire closet. The pristine collection of rare designer handbags she had constantly weaponized to mock my clearance rack shoes suddenly became her only viable lifeline. She packed her flawless Hermes, Chanel, and Prada bags into heavy garbage bags and dragged them to a high-end luxury consignment boutique in Buckhead. This was the exact same boutique where she used to casually drop tens of thousands of dollars on a random Tuesday afternoon while sipping complimentary champagne. Now she stood nervously at the appraisal counter, watching the stern, judgmental clerk meticulously examine her items for scratches and wear. The clerk offered her pennies on the dollar, coldly explaining that the secondary market was currently flooded and her specific items were no longer in season. Tasha tried to argue, her voice rising in typical entitled outrage, but the clerk simply slid the bags back across the glass counter and told her she could take the initial cash offer or leave the store. Tasha swallowed her fierce pride, signed the meager consignment contract, and walked out into the sweltering heat with a fraction of the money she needed to survive the month. The cash from her designer bags barely covered her basic security deposit and her first 2 months of rent. For the very first time in her 32 years on this earth, Tasha had to physically look for a job. She polished up a pathetic, essentially blank resume, attempting to heavily inflate her experience, organizing lavish charity galas, and hosting extravagant country club luncheons into legitimate corporate project management. Corporate Atlanta was entirely unforgiving. Every prestigious marketing firm and high-end public relations agency instantly recognized her heavily tarnished last name. They took one look at her complete lack of actual work experience and immediately tossed her applications directly into the shredder. The corporate world my father used to fiercely dominate had permanently closed its heavy doors to her. With her options rapidly shrinking and her utility bills piling up dangerously high on her cheap laminate kitchen counter, Tasha was forced to accept a harsh, unforgiving reality. She applied for a minimum wage retail position at a busy, brightly lit department store situated inside a crowded suburban shopping mall. The hiring manager did not care about her light skin, her supposed old money pedigree, or her former country club status. They only cared that she could fold clothes efficiently and operate a basic cash register. Tasha was handed a stiff, unflattering polyester uniform and a plastic name tag. The golden child of the Warren family was now making $14 an hour, folding heavily discounted denim. The grueling physical reality of manual labor shattered her fragile, pampered body almost immediately. Standing on hard tile floors for 8 exhausting hours a day made her feet ache with a deep, throbbing pain she had never known. She had to deal with rude, demanding customers who snapped their fingers at her, completely oblivious to the fact that she used to look down on service workers with absolute disgust. She spent her short, heavily monitored 15-minute breaks sitting in a drab, windowless break room, desperately rubbing her swollen ankles. In those quiet, agonizing moments of sheer physical exhaustion, the harsh memories of her past cruelty finally caught up to her. She vividly remembered the brutal summer I lost my college housing. She remembered casually laughing at me as I limped through the front door after working a grueling double shift, my uniform smelling strongly of bleach and cheap frying oil. She had mockingly told me that struggling builds character, while she carelessly spent the tuition money my father had stolen from me. The absolute irony of her current situation was profound and inescapable. The universe had forcefully stripped away every single layer of her unearned privilege, violently dropping her into the exact same trench she had relentlessly bullied me for occupying. She was finally learning the true, unvarnished cost of a single dollar. Every time she had to bite her tongue and apologize to an unreasonable customer, every time she had to carefully budget her meager paycheck just to afford basic groceries, the crushing weight of her own karma pressed down upon her. She was slowly discovering that character is not built through generational wealth or elite social standing. It is built through resilience, hard work, and survival. Tasha was finally learning how to survive. While Tasha was painfully learning the harsh reality of minimum wage labor folding denim in a bleak suburban mall, my mother was busy orchestrating a far more desperate, highly public comeback. Brenda simply could not fathom living the rest of her life in absolute obscurity. Her tiny one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Atlanta felt like a suffocating physical prison. She despised the peeling linoleum floors, the incredibly loud neighbors, and the humiliating fact that she now had to take public transportation just to buy cheap groceries. Instead of reflecting on her colossal mistakes or seeking genuine redemption, my mother decided to weaponize her victimhood. She believed that if she could just reclaim control of the public narrative, her wealthy megachurch community and elite sorority sisters would instantly rally to her defense. She relentlessly contacted several prominent local journalists until she finally secured an exclusive sit-down interview with the senior editor of Atlanta Prestige, the very same high society magazine that used to regularly feature our extravagant family galas. Brenda staged the pathetic scene with absolute meticulous precision. She wore a faded but recognizable designer dress, deliberately omitting her usual heavy makeup to appear fragile, exhausted, and deeply heartbroken. When the journalist and the camera crew arrived at her cramped apartment, my mother immediately launched into a highly calculated, tearful monologue. She aggressively painted me as a cruel, money-hungry monster, completely devoid of any human empathy. She looked directly into the camera lens and brazenly lied, claiming that I had used confusing illegal computer hacking to steal my father's legitimate real estate empire out of sheer, unadulterated jealousy. She wept dramatically, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, insisting that Preston was an innocent, hard-working family man whom I had maliciously framed to satisfy a deep, lifelong vendetta against my own flesh and blood. She begged the affluent Atlanta community to forgive her current financial destitution and asked for their prayers against the wicked daughter who had violently destroyed their beautiful, loving family. She fully expected that deeply manipulative, highly emotional interview to serve as her triumphant return to high society grace. However, Brenda had completely forgotten that she was attempting to wage a public relations war against the chief executive officer of an elite crisis management firm. My corporate intelligence division flagged the upcoming magazine feature 3 full days before it was ever scheduled to go to print. I did not feel a single ounce of anger when my lead public relations director brought the transcripts into my corner office. I simply smiled, feeling a cold, clinical satisfaction. I instructed my digital team to execute a flawless preemptive counterstrike. We did not bother sending angry cease and desist letters to the local magazine. Instead, we completely bypassed them. We directly contacted the top investigative journalism team at a major national news network and handed them a massive, fully verified digital dossier containing the absolute unvarnished truth. The federal audit files we released were incredibly thorough and absolutely devastating. We did not just leak the undeniable financial records proving Preston's massive offshore gambling debts and my father's gross corporate negligence. We deliberately leaked the internal, highly encrypted email chains between my mother and Preston. The nation got to read the exact, horrifying messages where Brenda actively instructed her white son-in-law on how to quietly siphon money away from local black charities to quickly cover up his missing funds. We exposed her deeply racist, incredibly elitist text messages, where she ruthlessly mocked the very same megachurch pastors and wealthy sorority sisters she was currently begging for public sympathy. We released verified audio recordings of my mother calling her devoted church congregation a bunch of gullible, poor fools who existed solely to fund her extravagant, luxurious lifestyle. The digital dossier was a monumental, undeniable masterpiece of absolute factual destruction. The explosive story went globally viral, exactly 12 hours before Brenda's pathetic, tearful magazine interview was supposed to hit the newsstands. The editor of Atlanta Prestige immediately scrapped my mother's fabricated victim piece, terrified of the massive legal and social backlash of platforming a documented fraud. The sheer scale of the public outrage was absolutely breathtaking to witness. The elite Black society of Atlanta does not easily forgive betrayal, but they absolutely ruthlessly destroy anyone who mocks their community behind closed doors. The prominent megachurch pastor formally and publicly excommunicated my parents from the congregation during a live Sunday broadcast. Her prestigious, historically Black sorority officially revoked her lifetime membership, issuing a scathing public statement condemning her atrocious, deeply elitist behavior. The few remaining country club acquaintances who had previously offered my mother weak, pitiful smiles on the street now actively crossed the road to completely avoid her. Brenda was left completely isolated, trapped permanently inside the tiny, squalid apartment she had originally mocked. She could no longer hide behind her expensive pearls, her custom silk dresses, or her husband's powerful corporate titles. Every single time she walked out of her heavily dented front door, she was met with glaring stares of pure disgust from her new working-class neighbors, who had all seen the viral news reports detailing her horrendous financial crimes against local charities. Her expensive smartphone stopped ringing almost entirely. The fabulous dinner invitations completely ceased to exist forever. She was officially and completely canceled in every single social circle that had ever mattered to her in the past. In a last truly pathetic act of pure desperation, she attempted to physically walk into her former megachurch to publicly repent during a beautiful Sunday morning service. The heavily armed security guards swiftly turned her away at the grand entrance, firmly locking the heavy glass doors directly in her tearful face. She suddenly collapsed onto the cold concrete steps, weeping bitterly all alone. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch of the mighty Warren family had finally become a permanent, widely despised outcast, forever banished to the very bottom of the social hierarchy she had once ruled. 2 weeks after my mother's final public collapse, I left the suffocating city limits of Atlanta and booked a private flight directly to Louisiana. The air felt entirely different down south, thick with unspoken history and deep generational memory. I rented a sleek black SUV at the private airfield and drove for 2 hours out into the lush, sprawling countryside. I finally turned down a long, winding dirt road framed by towering ancient oak trees dripping with heavy Spanish moss. At the very end of the long driveway stood the heavily contested ancestral estate. It was a massive historic colonial property that had been fiercely guarded by my family for 4 entire generations. When I stepped out of my vehicle, the crushing silence of the isolated property immediately washed over me. Brenda and Warren had relentlessly weaponized this exact house against me for my entire adult life. They had constantly threatened to banish me from these sacred grounds to keep me obedient, acting as if this wood and stone held the ultimate key to my worth as a black woman. I unlocked the heavy mahogany front doors and stepped into the expansive, dusty foyer. The interior of the massive house was a devastating physical reflection of my parents' profound corporate negligence. Because they had secretly remortgaged the historic property to quietly cover Preston's offshore gambling debts, they had completely abandoned basic maintenance for years. The expensive patterned wallpaper was peeling away from the damp walls in long, ugly strips. The original hardwood floors were deeply scuffed, and a harsh, musty smell permeated the stagnant air. They had been willing to let our proud century-old family history literally rot away into absolute nothingness just to protect a fraudulent white man who viewed them as nothing more than an easy paycheck. I walked slowly through the empty, echoing dining room, running my hand along the thick layer of dust covering the antique fireplace mantel. I felt an intense, burning wave of pure motivation ignite deep within my chest. I refused to let this powerful piece of Black history crumble into dust. I did not purchase this massive estate just to sell it to the highest commercial bidder for a quick profit. I immediately pulled out my smartphone and began making aggressive high-level corporate calls. Within 48 hours, I had a massive, highly elite team of local structural engineers, historic preservation architects, and commercial interior designers swarming the sprawling property. I spared absolutely no expense in resurrecting the grand estate. I hired exclusively Black-owned contracting firms from the local Louisiana area, pouring millions of dollars directly back into the working-class community my parents had always so deeply despised. We tore down the rotting drywall, reinforced the sagging structural beams, and completely modernized the outdated electrical grids. However, we carefully preserved the original breathtaking historic charm of the stately exterior architecture. I spent 3 entire months flying back and forth between my busy corporate headquarters in Atlanta and the dusty construction zones in Louisiana. I personally oversaw every single major design decision. I did not want to recreate a sterile, intimidating country club environment. I wanted to build an inspiring, technologically advanced fortress of absolute empowerment. However, the physical renovation of the property was not the only war I had to wage. The ancestral estate was located in a fiercely conservative, notoriously insular Louisiana parish. It was a place where the old money hierarchy still clung desperately to antiquated antebellum traditions and heavily veiled racial prejudices. When the local municipal planning board caught wind of exactly what a 34-year-old independent Black woman was attempting to build on one of the most prominent historic properties in the county, the systemic resistance was immediate, aggressive, and highly coordinated. Enter Elias Caldwell, the head of the parish zoning commission. Caldwell was a walking, breathing stereotype of the fading Southern aristocracy. He wore perfectly pressed seersucker suits, flashed condescending, tight-lipped smiles, and boasted a family lineage deeply tied to the original brutal exploitation of the local land. For 3 infuriating weeks, Caldwell systematically blocked every single commercial permit I submitted. He denied the authorization to upgrade the estate's massive electrical grid. He halted the excavation crews attempting to install the heavy underground fiber optic cables required for my high-speed servers. On official paperwork, Caldwell cited grave concerns over the preservation of the estate's sacred historical integrity. But I knew exactly what game he was playing. I was looking at a confident, dark-skinned Black woman who refused to shrink herself, attempting to assert absolute commercial dominance over a historic property. His wealthy friends believed they should rightfully control. His fragile, deeply ingrained superiority complex simply could not tolerate my presence. He finally requested a mandatory in-person preservation inspection of the grounds. I agreed, scheduling it for a sweltering, humid Thursday afternoon. I stood on the wide, sweeping front porch, flanked by my lead corporate attorney and my senior structural engineer. Caldwell arrived in a luxury SUV, stepping onto my gravel driveway, with two junior inspectors trailing behind him like obedient dogs. He looked up at the massive colonial columns, then looked at me, a deeply patronizing smirk playing on his lips. "Ms. Warren," Caldwell drawled intentionally, using the toxic last name I had legally discarded, clearly attempting to put me in what he perceived as my rightful place. "This is a magnificent, historically vital property. We simply cannot allow an out-of-state tech startup to come in here and violently gut the interior just to lay down some ugly computer wires. We have a strict duty to preserve the elegance of the Old South. I am afraid I am going to have to permanently deny your commercial zoning variance. You will have to keep it as a residential estate, or perhaps sell it to someone who understands its true refined value." My parents would have instantly cowered before this man. Brenda would have nervously offered him expensive iced tea and desperately pleaded for his high society approval. Warren would have pathetically offered him a massive illegal bribe to secure his favor, capitulating completely to the white old money establishment just as he had done with Preston. I did not offer him a bribe. I did not offer him tea. I offered him his own professional destruction. I did not flinch or break eye contact as I slowly walked down the stone steps, stopping mere inches from his arrogant face. "I am not an out-of-state tech startup, Mr. Caldwell," I stated, my voice dropping to a lethal echoing calm that made his two junior inspectors nervously step back. "I am the chief executive officer of Vanguard Private Equity, and you clearly failed to do your basic due diligence before stepping onto my property today." Caldwell's patronizing smirk faltered slightly, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. I pulled a thick-bound legal folder from my attorney's hands and pressed it firmly against Caldwell's chest, forcing him to take it. "While you were busy deliberately stalling my electrical permits for the past 3 weeks to stroke your own fragile ego, my firm was busy conducting a sweeping forensic analysis of this county's municipal debt. Your parish is currently operating on a massive catastrophic budget deficit. To keep your local government functioning, your office recently issued $30 million in municipal bonds." Caldwell's face suddenly turned a sickly pale shade of gray. He swallowed hard, the humid Louisiana heat suddenly causing thick beads of sweat to form on his forehead. "Vanguard Private Equity just purchased every single one of those municipal bonds," I declared, my voice slicing through the thick summer air with absolute unapologetic authority. "I am now the primary senior creditor for this entire county. I literally own the debt that paves your roads, funds your local police department, and pays your personal government salary. If you do not approve every single one of my commercial zoning permits by 800 a.m. tomorrow morning, I will immediately call in the entirety of the bonds due to your office's documented history of discriminatory zoning practices. I will bankrupt this entire parish before lunchtime, and I will personally ensure the federal oversight committees know exactly whose bigotry caused the financial collapse." The heavy, suffocating silence that fell over the front lawn was absolute perfection. The powerful, condescending Southern aristocrat was instantly reduced to a terrified, trembling bureaucrat. He looked down at the legal documents in his shaking hands, realizing with absolute horror that he was standing face to face with an apex predator who wielded infinitely more financial power than his old money ancestors could have ever comprehended. "Do you understand the new historical integrity of this estate, Mr. Caldwell?" I asked quietly, delivering the final crushing blow. "I am not asking for your permission to build on my land. I am informing you of my timeline. Now get off my property." Caldwell did not say a single word. He practically scrambled backward, his pristine seersucker suit suddenly looking ridiculous, and practically sprinted back to his luxury SUV with his inspectors. By 7:30 a.m., the very next morning, every single permit, zoning variance, and electrical authorization I had requested was officially approved, digitally stamped, and expedited directly to my inbox. I had fundamentally broken the systemic old money curse of the region in a single afternoon. The gates were finally thrown wide open. Instead of outfitting the massive empty rooms with useless, expensive luxury furniture, meant only for arrogant high society display, I ordered top-of-the-line commercial servers and hundreds of high-speed computer workstations. We completely transformed the giant, stuffy, formal dining room into a highly sophisticated interactive coding laboratory. The spacious outdoor sunrooms were converted into collaborative glass-walled conference centers equipped with massive digital smartboards. The grand parlor became a comprehensive financial literacy library, stocked entirely with advanced texts on corporate wealth management, private equity strategy, and international cybersecurity protocols. I established the Vanguard Genesis Foundation, a fully funded, highly rigorous educational incubator specifically designed for brilliant, underprivileged young Black women. I wanted to actively search for the brilliant, dark-skinned girls who were constantly told they were too loud, too ambitious, or too ordinary to succeed in the ruthless corporate world. I wanted to find the exact girls who lacked elite social pedigrees and offer them the exact same rigorous high-level financial backing that my parents had so cruelly deliberately denied me when I was struggling. The grand opening ceremony of the Vanguard Genesis Foundation took place on a bright, beautiful Saturday morning in early spring. There were no arrogant politicians, no hypocritical megachurch pastors, and absolutely no superficial socialites invited to this specific event. Instead, the newly renovated immaculate front lawn was filled with 50 incredible young women who had earned full academic scholarships to my new program. They walked through the tall, freshly painted front doors with their eyes shining with genuine excitement and pure, unadulterated hope. I stood proudly on the wide front porch, watching them eagerly take their seats in the modernized high-tech classrooms. My elite team of corporate executives and senior financial analysts had flown in from Atlanta to serve as their permanent dedicated mentors. We were going to teach these young women how to ruthlessly audit predatory corporations, how to aggressively code impenetrable security software, and how to command absolute respect in male-dominated corporate boardrooms. I walked quietly into the back of the main coding laboratory and watched a brilliant 16-year-old girl successfully compile her very first complex database algorithm. Her confident, radiant smile instantly healed a deeply bruised, lingering part of my own inner child. My parents had foolishly tried to use this historic, beautiful land as a cruel weapon of ultimate financial manipulation. They had treated this sacred home as a cheap bargaining chip to enforce my absolute submission. Now, their lost ancestral estate was actively generating massive generational wealth for dozens of young women who would eventually go on to completely dominate the global financial sector. I forged their darkest legacy into Black excellence. My foundation broke down doors and my new legacy was officially secured. 5 years have passed since the grand opening of the Vanguard Genesis Foundation. I am standing on the balcony of my Atlanta penthouse, looking out over the city skyline as the sun dips below the horizon. The cool evening breeze carries the sounds of the bustling streets below, but up here, there is nothing but peace. Inside my home, the atmosphere is warm and vibrant. I am hosting a dinner for my executive team and the first graduating cohort of our Louisiana Incubator program. The penthouse is filled with the joyful laughter of brilliant, driven Black women who are actively reshaping the global financial sector. They are sharing ideas, networking, and celebrating their corporate victories. I look at them and see the vibrant, healthy family I actively chose to build. We do not share blood, but we share a profound, unbreakable bond forged in mutual respect and shared ambition. This is my true legacy. I did not inherit an empire. I built a sanctuary. My biological family remains a distant, fading memory. I have not spoken a single word to my mother, my father, or my sister since the day I legally evicted them from their sprawling suburban estate. Through the vast network of Atlanta society gossip, which occasionally filters back to my corporate offices, I know exactly how their lives have settled into a permanent state of ruin. Preston is still sitting in a maximum security federal penitentiary halfway through his brutal 10-year sentence. Tasha eventually divorced him when the harsh reality of her minimum wage retail job completely broke her fragile spirit. She currently lives in a tiny, cramped apartment with roommates entirely stripped of the unearned luxury she once used as a weapon. My father Warren suffered a massive heart attack 2 years ago. He survived, but his health is permanently compromised, and he works as a low-level consultant for a minor property management firm that pities his spectacular downfall. My mother, Brenda, remains utterly isolated on the south side of the city. Her relentless, pathetic attempts to claw her way back into high society were universally mocked and firmly rejected. She spends her days entirely alone, trapped in a prison of her own making, consumed by the bitter realization that she sacrificed her brilliant daughter to protect a white thief who destroyed her entire world. I feel absolutely no guilt when I think about their miserable circumstances. I only feel a profound, sweeping sense of emotional liberation. For 34 years, I carried the crushing, suffocating weight of their toxic expectations. I allowed them to make me feel ugly, unworthy, and invisible because I mistakenly believed that family loyalty required unconditional submission to abuse. I thought that if I just worked harder, achieved more, and remained quiet, they would eventually love me. The catastrophic events at my father's birthday gala completely shattered that dangerous illusion forever. I finally understood that you cannot negotiate with people who actively benefit from your pain. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick. You have to aggressively cut the infection out at the root, even if that root is attached to your own parents. Breaking a generational curse is not a peaceful, quiet process. It is a violent, deeply painful severing of toxic ties. Society constantly tells us that blood is thicker than water, that we must endlessly forgive our family members because they are the only family we have. That is a dangerous, manipulative lie designed to keep victims trapped in endless cycles of emotional abuse. Sometimes protecting your peace requires becoming the absolute villain in their fabricated narrative. It requires stepping into your own power, securing your own financial independence, and ruthlessly locking the door behind you. I had to completely tear down the rotting, diseased family tree to plant a brand new, healthy one in its place. I watered my new roots with absolute truth, fierce boundaries, and uncompromising self-respect. The young women laughing inside my penthouse are the beautiful, thriving fruit of that difficult labor. They will never have to beg for a seat at the table because I bought the entire building and gave them the master keys. They will never have to endure the crushing racial and gender discrimination that my parents willingly enabled. We are actively creating a new paradigm of Black excellence, one that does not require sacrificing our dignity or protecting corrupt individuals just to maintain a fragile, fake social image. True wealth is absolutely not defined by massive commercial real estate portfolios, expensive designer gowns, or exclusive country club memberships. True wealth is the ability to sleep soundly at night, knowing you have lived your life with absolute integrity and unshakable courage. I turn away from the stunning city skyline and step back inside my beautiful, thriving home. My chief operating officer hands me a crystal glass of sparkling cider, offering a warm, genuine smile. I raise my glass to toast the incredible women surrounding me, celebrating our shared triumphs and our incredibly bright future. The journey from the dark, isolated kitchen of my childhood to the absolute pinnacle of corporate power was treacherous, but I survived every single battle. I emerged from the blazing fire significantly stronger, much wiser, and completely unstoppable. If you are watching this right now, and you are suffocating under the toxic weight of your family's impossible expectations, please listen carefully. You are not a disappointment. You are not a failure. You are simply planted in the entirely wrong soil. Do not be afraid to walk away from people who refuse to see your brilliance. Do not be afraid to aggressively protect your peace, finances, and mental health. You have the absolute power to rewrite your own story. You have the strength to build your own empire from the ground up. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Share your stories of breaking generational curses in the comments below. Never let anyone dim your magnificent light.